I'm an art writer, editor, and translator based in Tokyo. I also have an education practice, working with various universities and alternative art programs here in Japan. And for the past 5 years, I've been teaching in the Graduate School of Global Arts at Tokyo University of the Arts. And the Graduate School of Global Arts is a program targeting prospective curators, researchers, and art administrators, with classes conducted in a mix of English and Japanese. And so I had basically organized a foundation course for this program, thinking about what it means to have a global practice, or rather questioning what it means to have a global practice in today's world. Obviously, there was a bit of institutional critique in sort of the motivation for this course, because I wanted to, make people think critically about the very course they were undertaking, and question the assumptions that we make when we talk about globality, when we talk about nationality. So within that framework, I've been teaching curatorial theory and practice, and I met Adila Suleiman. I think it was at the Busan Biennale a couple of years ago, and she mentioned that she was interested in getting some programs started with Vasl. So I'm very excited to be able to organize these talks for you. And it's really great, again, to kind of hear from each of you who are in this program, and very inspiring to learn about how active you are. Today, we're very honored to have as our guest Barto, Leonhard Bartolomeus. He's a curator with the Yamaguchi Center for Art and Media in Yamaguchi, Japan, which is in the vicinity of Hiroshima. Barto was born in Indonesia and graduated from the Jakarta Institute of Art in 2012, after which he joined the collective called Ruangrupa. You may have heard of them. They were the artistic director of the previous Documenta in 2022. So Barto was working with Ruangrupa, and eventually with an educational initiative they set up with some other collectives in Jakarta called Gudskul Ekosistem, prior to moving to Yamaguchi in 2019. And I think Barto has a lot of interesting experience working in the Indonesian context, where there is not a lot of institutional infrastructure to speak of, but also working in the Japanese environment, which has one of the densest art infrastructures in the world. And I think, not only dense in terms of, having museums and art centers in all the major prefectures and all the major cities, and even very local cities, or even in neighborhoods of cities, but also dense in terms of the bureaucracy and administration as well. So I think Barto brings a really interesting perspective that I think will also be informative for thinking about how to approach curation where you are in Lahore and Karachi. So Barto, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Razin, Andrew, and the team from Vasl. And yeah, I think I'm quite doubting myself whether I could contribute any other new knowledge to everyone, because I heard that your experience is, well, it's almost similar with mine. But yeah, I think I might share some of my stories regarding like curations, and I hope it could contribute to your, how do I say, like to your class or lecture. I just start this story to talk about how I work within the constraints, especially as Andrew has been mentioned, related to Indonesian situations. Perhaps some of you also know, and kind of like try to exploring various options to develop a project, not only based on institution. But I would like to start my story to talk about Ruangrupa, the place where I start my curatorial career. So I think some of you also may already know this kind of phase, which has been quite famous in last year through the documenta. But I have been working with Ruangrupa since like 2010. Started working with them as volunteers, and at the same time start to like learning or understanding what is contemporary art, because at the time most of the art school in Indonesia is really based on a modern perspective of art, which is like paintings and designs and so on and so forth. They don't really offer about contemporary art. So I took my opportunity to join them, and it's kind of like giving me a different point of view about what kind of things is contemporary arts and how we should develop projects within the vicinity of the neighborhood. Yeah, I think there's a question about like what is a collective at the time, especially when we are in the art school. Everyone was being taught that to be an artist, you need to be like a very strong individual, and you need to maintain your identity apart from the others, and kind of like giving this competitive spirits for the students. But I saw one exhibition that was being held in 2010. It's called like Fixer, Alternative Space and Art Groups in Indonesia. And in that introduction, Ade Darmawan, one of the founder of Ruangrupa, he mentioned, kind of like his own terms about what is an alternative space and what is an artist group, which, yeah, like written on the screen, it's an effort to respond to change in the society for the sake of the development of ideas, of art practices that are more relevant and immediately involved with the reality in the society, which is, I think it's quite uncommon at the time. When people start to talking about art, usually it's always related with um, commodity, so object production. Usually it's always ended up with a product. But most of these art groups that were exist in Indonesia at that time is focusing a little bit more, how to working within the society. Yeah, this is the exhibition that I mentioned. It's kind of like a survey of how different collective in Indonesia is trying to work. So there's a different presentation or different profile from each of the collective, and you can see they actually share the similar identity or approach. But what makes me interested with Ruangrupa is how they approach the usage of space. And perhaps for me, this is one of the very first notion that I learned as curators, which is placemaking. So the way Ruangrupa conducted their activities is always based on a private house. I think it's also kind of like same with some of your practice as well. And kind of like started to doing their activities over there. But instead of like doing things by themselves, they try to involve the communities around them, and then kind of like try to build some connection in order to understand what is their role for the society. But also at the same time, the space itself is become a place where young artists can meet, young curators can exchange discussion, and like I said, talking about some form of contemporary arts that was not being taught in our art school. And yeah, that's also like where the name come from. It's like, Ruangrupa is basically mean visual space, because it's a house and it's a space where people can actually learn about visual arts at the beginning. But then there's a lot of things like how this idea of like finding different practices in that exist within the society, it's also like affecting how Ruangrupa is evolve or develop in the upcoming years. Like for example, because they have a lot of young artists, usually art students, that were coming to the space and then kind of like talk with them, and they found out like there's an issue about this connection between like young artists in Jakarta at the time. So they did this kind of like art student biennale, whereas like try to connecting different art students around Jakarta at the time, and it's become like one of the major hit because they could convince an institution called National Gallery of Indonesia, which is one of the most biggest and the only state-owned art gallery, to kind of like doing this kind of project. So at the time, if you are an art school in Jakarta, to be able to participate in this program, it's kind of like giving you a very big achievement because you show your work in National Art Gallery. But from Ruangrupa perspective, it's more about like how to hack this public institution in order to give platform for kind of like emerging artists, emerging curators practice, which sometimes it's not being acceptable in major institutions. They will look at the portfolio, like how long have you been, like how long your career has been, and so on and so forth. So I feel this is kind of like really, really interesting approach that Ruangrupa has been taking. And
So,
then yeah, there's also like the one of the projects that I've been joining since I was art school student.
yeah, and Barto,
Um,
is Jakarta 32 degrees C still going, or did it stop at some point?
it's still going on, and I think before the pandemic, but we changed the way we work. So usually, I think up until 2012, everything is coming from Ruangrupa. Like we initiate the movement, we kind of like curating like the works. But then after 2012, we changed the approach, and instead of like us curating, we asking them, like the students who used to joining this event before, to take charge, like taking charge as curators and also like organizers. So they're not only become like an exhibit to exhibit their works, but also they learn how to manage a project, how to run an exhibition, and we do this kind of things called how do you call it? Like it's like a battle between each university. So we asking them to go like to different. We ask like University A to go to University B and kind of like giving their five best artworks or artists, and then kind of like presenting to them. And so it's kind of like building a dynamic communication, and giving them the power, the ownership to take the project. And I think it will restart again by this year after it's after it stopped during the pandemic. So yeah, it's still going on, but it's really, really it's really, really chaotic right now, like the way they manage. But it's also like good because then you see how the program is grow, and it's become like one of the important platform for art school students to do this kind of things. And yeah, I think it's one of the major reasons like why then Ruangrupa changed to become like good school, to become a school in 2018. But yeah, I will get to that later. Yeah, so this is like I just showing you some images from the very early periods of Ruangrupa where people used to hang out, and then some of the idea is also coming from this exchange. Like we did the first media art international media art festival in Indonesia in 2003. Um, because we had this opportunity to collaborate and exchange with some video or media artists from abroad, and they kind of like decided let's do this kind of thing, because at the time no one or nobody talking about media arts in the mainstream. So then again, like everything is based on necessity, like, oh, we think this is important to share, so then they do it instead of like waiting around the discourse among the academic field. But yeah, they have different challenge, I think, at the time, because to convince people to do this kind of like international media art, it's really not easy, because at the time everyone is asking like, how come a video works become an artwork? So that was an interesting issue even for me as an art student at the time. I'm questioning them like, how do you think like this blurry image 3GP or like something like that, you're calling it as an art? Like, but then yeah, it's a long way to go over there. But again, I think I need to mention quite often about the necessities, because some of like most of the project is always happen for a reason. I mean, I don't say like there's a pro that like most like every project is always related with society, but then most of the programs that they did, that we did at the time, it's always came up from you know conditions that we might need to be involved. Like some of the programs that we did is kind of training program, which is kind of like reconnecting with the locals, and because it's they consider it as their program, that they allow us, the government allow us to block the street in order to have this um cinema program. And then it's kind of like going on after like year after year, but it's not always successful, because at some point um the public, or some part of the public, the communities that we're working with, started to see like, oh, this is quite actually could bring some profit. So they started charging us like, oh yeah, if you want to do this project, like you need to pay a certain amount of money. So yeah, we kind of like stopped doing this project after like 10 years. But yeah, that's one of the constraints that we need to face. Like once they understood there's economic value on it, like why not we taking profit from that? Um, yeah, this is also like another example of what I said about the necessity. So this is a project called Urban Guerrilla, which is in collaboration with one of the private university in Jakarta. And then the idea is very simple. The teacher of one department from the architectural department is want to challenge the students to not only creating like architecture as a building, but instead like trying to go out to the public and talk with people to understand like there's a different ways of solving problem based on, their needs. So we kind of like working together with them, doing some workshop and kind of giving them a different ways of problem. Um, so some people is dealing with space, some people dealing with like how to create, a street kiosk vendor or a street vendor device that could allows them to carry many things. But yeah, at the end, this project then become like one of the thesis from the students that participating, and it create a chaos because the other teacher is angry. They said like this is not architecture, this is like product design. But yeah, I think the student is doing really well at the time. They could defend their thesis and explain why this kind of like project is related with, architecture as a, field of science. So, sometimes it's like we don't really control like how the result will go, but the process has become very important at the time. The other thing is also like they really pay attention with educational program, and this is maybe one of the highlights of my involvement with Ruangrupa. They started to doing this curatorial and art writing workshop since 2008, because the art school didn't offer any, class or lessons for, for you to become a curators or you to become like art critic. And it was a quite common sense at the time in my generations that if you wants to become a curator, it's either you don't have enough skill to make an artwork, or you just feel like making an art is not for you, so you try to find a way to figuring yourself. So it's really like really difficult situation for people who wants to be curator, because like you don't really have an access to understand what it is. Most of that time we understood curation as like, making a text, like an introduction, which then actually it's not really true. It's part of it, but then you have a much wider variety of tasks that you can do as curators. So they're doing this kind of projects like every year from 2008 up until 2018, so almost 10 years. And I was one of the students that joining this curatorial workshop time, and it's also function as a recruitment tools, because you will find like some young generations that quite, have a similar frequency with you, and kind of at some point like you will end up working with them. So yeah, at some point I feel it's kind of like trap for me. It's, some slowly getting sucked into their daily life. But yeah, again, this is like for me, this is one of the curatorial works that they have been doing. And
Sorry, can I just quickly say, Barto, I think we should also appreciate that, even worldwide, there's not a huge amount of curatorial studies programs. It's still kind of an emerging field. And so there are some kind of classic programs in the UK and US and maybe in Europe, but even in Japan, we haven't had a proper curatorial studies program until within the past decade or so. So I think
oh,
a lot of, different ideas about,
interesting.
what the practice of curation is, still out there in the world.
Yeah, oh, I see. Well, yeah, that's one more good note for them, I think. Um, but yeah, I think it's yeah, I think when I'm moving to Japan, I'm started to kind of like, reflecting all my past activities when I was with them, and I just realized like, wow, this bunch of people have been doing quite a really good job. And of course, at the time we don't seeing it as curation. Um, but I realized like how we pick like each project to happen, how the project should happen, how we should follow the development of the society. Because especially like for Jakarta 32, um, you feel the difference from the generation that born before 2000 and the generation that born after 2000. It's kind of like a very huge gap, like how they manage through social media and then how they approach art, and then, because now they could learn almost anything from YouTube. So we need to be, embracing that fact as well. So that's why like the decision to give the platform for them to run by themselves, it's one of the interesting fact for me. But yeah, I think as an institution, I mean, Ruangrupa as an institution or as an organization, it's also like changing quite often within the first 15 years of their career. You can see the writing is not so good, so sorry for that. But there's a Dutch artist, curators, researcher that wrote this book called Also Space from Hot to Something Else. Um, I think you can finding it on the internet. It's about like he researched and interviewed three artist collective in Indonesia and tried to make a differentiation, like what kind of type and what kind of similarities that exist among them. And yeah, you see how Ruangrupa started to become like more and more institutional throughout the years, becoming, establishing platforms, started to dealing with government, how, it's no longer like receiving funding, but we could take action as to execute programs or giving advice for them. So it's, in a way, it's become a little bit more political. Then from 2015 onwards, it's more about responsibility. The first generation is already feel old. They feel like there should be a new generations that coming to change, replacing us. And yeah, this one is maybe like quite interesting for you as well. It's not really academical, but in 2011, we are being invited to take part in what's the name? Asian Art Biennale in Manchester. And for that project, we developed this book called Siasat. It's coming from an Arabic word, siasa, which means like tactical guide, strategy. It's basically a compilation of quotes, anecdotes, or like thoughts from all like Ruangrupa members regarding different issues within our practice. One thing that interesting is like the very last part of this book, there is how do you call it? There is a page that mentioning about what you can do as an artist run initiative or as an artist collective when you only have certain amount of resource. So the very first one is like you have nothing. You don't have space, you don't have money, you only have friends. And it kind of like, what can you do? Like, so, okay, let's meeting or make like performance and so on and so forth. And the interesting part for me, I think nobody realized, they put at the very last part is like something like when you're taking over like one of the biggest um, platform in your country or in the world. Like, so you have money, you have resource, like what you can do, which I don't think everyone knows that they will taking over Documenta in last year. So yeah, it's really like a very interesting readings to see how this conversation develop. I think I put the link um, on the slide. So if you want to download or like reading it later, it's up to you. Yeah, it's some of it may be like not really applied for current context, but yeah, most of it, I think it's still possible. And it's just interesting to see how your thoughts is developed throughout the years. So this could be like a model for us, like as curators, to keeping track what we have been doing. And yeah, like I said, so when Ruangrupa is taking charge as artistic director of Documenta, um, outside the controversy that happened within the event, the idea that they propose, it's actually really not something that, conceptual, as in a sense, like, something like new idea, but it's actually what we have been doing in the past 20 years. So it's really easy because in terms of like explaining the idea, because then it's something practical for us. Like we know how to do it, in a sense, like the method that we can choose, like inviting artists that have certain practice, or even like how we communicate with each other in order to, reach a similar goal. So that kind of situation is affecting a lot how they manage Documenta. I don't know, maybe some of you also like have been visiting the event. I'm not, so unfortunately I cannot say much, but yeah, I of course, like I know how it's being set up. But for me, like one thing that people maybe like don't really notice is like it's not only like exists because of Documenta, but it's already there in their practice in the past 20 years. Um, yeah, and then also like I also sharing this book in the slides with you if you want to download. There's so in accordance to Documenta 15, um, Ruangrupa and some of the friends in Indonesia, they published a book called Articulating Fixer. So Fixer is referring back to the exhibition that I mentioned before, the 2010, the first alternative group exhibition, and kind of like trying to looking how the collective in Indonesia have been developed. And then I think the book is very interesting because it offers a different take about how art should function outside the normal institution. So again, yeah, I mean, feel free if you want to reading it later. But yeah, then this all this experience and practice that I did with Ruangrupa is of course bringing a question for me, like how could I exist, or like what should I do without an institution, like what kind of things that I could make, because all of this question also coming from especially young curators who join the workshop, like, oh yeah, because Ruangrupa at the time already doing some negotiation or collaboration with the public institution. But what about us, like who just started to work as curators and doesn't really sell? If you cannot go to commercial gallery and they will straight away reject you at the moment you step in. So then I was that also like quite of my concerns, like what can I do outside this film? So then I formed this group of like temporary collective called in English it translates as urban poor curators. So it's basically everyone is really struggle financially. And we did the projects in one of the poorest neighborhood in Jakarta to understand how we can work outside the institution. Um, and at the time we had a very long discussions about how we as curators without any institution position ourselves in the society. And then we kind of like came up with this kind of three configuration. So curators for the public, which basically means like hierarchical relations, you work for a museum, and it's more likely it's kind of like a service base. You make an exhibition in order to educate the people and kind of like giving them presentation, or like curators with public, which at some point it's become like participatory art project, where you kind of like working with community to join your idea and somehow in filling in as participant. So that's how we think. Or like we can put ourselves as curator as the public. So instead of like making the idea based on our own um initiative, we could go like talking with the neighborhoods and trying to solving the problems with them. So we're trying to testing out like this three configuration. Like the first two, it's already there. Like there's a museum, and then there's already like this kind of participatory art project. But we never really know like is it really works if we go out to the public and tell them like, oh yeah, I'm a curator, please work with me. Like maybe it's not really interesting for them. And one of our biggest concern is like, if you are an artist, you have this craftsmanship. Like you can make things, you can draw, you can produce stuff. But then as curators, like what can we contribute? Like it just thoughts, because like I talked with Andrew couple of days ago. Like curators at some point, I feel it's like a jack of all trades. Like we are in the middle, and we do like almost everything. Like like conceptually thinking philosophically about the exhibition, budgeting, dealing with permission, report, and so on and so forth. So we never really set our foot in one particular field. It's always like, I mean, no matter what you do, whether you're in institution or independent, it's always like that. Always like trying to deal with different things. So yeah, we share the same concern. So then I said like, yeah, maybe we should try like and see whether this idea of like working as the public could work. So then I proposed this project to an institution called Jakarta Arts Council. And I said like, let's, instead of like doing a curatorial workshop as we did before, let's try this kind of like laboratory experimentation. So I invite like numbers like curators, maybe 7 or 8 from different cities in Indonesia, and kind of like asking them if they want to join this project. And we work in one of the, like I said, like densest and poorest neighborhood in Jakarta, which also that's where the name of this temporary group came from. So this group of like marginalized people is forming an initiative called Urban Poor Consortium, which kind of like, trying to advocating their rights as a citizen of the city. Because usually when you live within this, riverside illegally, the government will come and they will say like, yeah, you need to be moved, or we will evict you anyway. So this kind of group of people from the Urban Poor Consortium is always trying to do this advocation for the poor people. But I met one of them in another occasion, and then they told me like, do you really think art could help us in terms of like changing the perspective of the people? And I said like, well, I don't know, like let's try. Because usually it's always like this, like two fights. So it's always like whenever they do protest or demonstration, it always end up with fight, and someone, 1 or 2 people is injured or even like lose their life. So I think at some point the people that living in this neighborhood also feel like really tired having this kind of condition. And they actually asked me like, yeah, because we don't really want to fight the government. We want to collaborate with them, but the approaches never exist. So we kind of like doing this, one curators in one small, we call it village in Indonesia. And then each of them is kind of like working with the community over there. I will not tell all the project, but maybe like one or two. This is the first village that we came. It's called like Green Shell Village because they basically a shell farmer, and you can see in the ground that they stood, it's not soil, it's actually a shell, you know, a large mass of land made up from like shell because it's for consumption, no? So they took out the inside of the shell, the meat, and then they just kind of like throwing the waste. And then they've been living there for about 20, 30 years. And then those waste is becoming land somehow. It's stacking up and it's kind of like becoming their own land. I'm quite interested with that. But then anyway, one of my friend who doing project in here, like he talked with the people and then they said like, yeah, we want to celebrate like making a monument for our village. So what they did together is then like taking out this old ship who actually like drowned in the uh, at the sea when they had a very big flood that happening maybe 5 or 6 years before. So some of the people from the villages or the villages is go down and then picking up and then they carry this ship into the middle of the village and then they said like, yeah, we want to make something like this. So the drawing is came from them. We want to make something as a monument to celebrate our existence in this village and to show the government that we also have the rights for this land because they've been there for quite some time. And then yeah, this is how it goes. Yeah, it's quite fun, but also dangerous at some point because you don't really know if the government will come and try to evict you. But after this event, how do I say? Some of the government is come and kind of like because then they clean up the whole village, for doing this event, and then they see it and then they said like, oh yeah, actually like it's quite nice to see how this village turned out to be like quite tidy or a little bit organized. So yeah, it's become a win-win solution for the government and for them instead of like keep fighting all the time. I think I had a very short video when they pulling out. Not sure if it's you see like all the grounds. That's all like shell waste. So it's yeah, again, very, very not easy to live environment, but they've been living there for quite some time. Sorry. The interesting part is like we said to ourselves like, oh yeah, we should behave quite well because this kind of people that we're going to working with, perhaps their economic level is below us. So we need to try to be as humble as possible. But it turns out it's the opposite because they got a lot of income and then they said like, you look so not well. Like, have you eat? Like, yeah, we have eat. And this guy, no, let us pay for your food. And then they kind of like paying us everything, because they can't feel happy with this project. And I'm like, yeah, what do you want to eat? Like, okay, let's eat together. And we feel like, oh, it's actually us that actually poor. That's why we took the name as Urban Poor Curator. But yeah, we never know about this until we met them. This is another project that's happening in one of the village. We kind of like working with them and inviting one artist to do a workshop for the kids because they want to decorate the river that splitting their village. And one of the problem in this village is like the kids is actually like the kids and the teenager, they don't want to live there anymore. So they want to go out because they feel they've been quite traumatic with all the events that happening. So the workshop is become like asking the childrens and the teenagers to draw something in the plastic bucket from their own house and kind of like put their wishes over there. It's kind of like, so it's become like what they want to do, how they want the future of this village to be in the next 5 or 10 years. And then, it's become like a 7 week of dialogue with the villagers and also the government. What's this? Oh, anyway, I can skip this. So yeah, basically most of this project is it's always something like this. For about 2 weeks, we're spending like 2 weeks to talk with them, explaining to them what we can do. But also for some projects, it's we kind of like train them to be the curators for the village. Because this kind of neighborhood is quite popular for like artists and also filmmakers to come and do their shooting or do their participatory art project, collaboration, whatever. And every time we ask them, like we ask the villagers, like, how do you feel about this? And they said, like, yeah, we're quite happy having foreigner or like artists coming here, but we never really know what kind of things that they do. They just come, shoot, pointing microphone to you and then asking you to share your story. So for some of the villagers, they're asking like, can you teach us or train us to be our village curator? So then for about 2 weeks, we kind of like sharing with them a very basic um, way, how you can curate without really working in a very, academical level. So this is how you select the artist. And I think it's like 1 year or 2 years ago, like I received information from them, like, oh yeah, we do a project with one artist, and what the interesting part is like they changed the whole they changed the whole plan from the artist because they said like, no, we don't think this is good for our village. You should do this, you should do that. And then they kind of like, okay. So yeah, I mean, of course, like it's not only because of this project, but to see how this thing can be developed and then for them to have their own powers to control what happened in their village is really interesting for me to see. This is part of like curatorial works that we could do. So it's keep repeating. Yeah, then some other places also, like we're trying to work with this kind of ancestry, because Indonesian in the past is related closely with Hinduism, and some of this like old ancient tomb is not really well managed when the development of right wing Islam movement happening in Indonesia. So then some of the curator is started to doing this project. It's kind of like um, how do you call it, recleaning or remaking the ancient tomb to be a little bit more proper, not for the sake of the religions, but to just let the people know like we came from this way. So instead of like destroying everything that's not aligned with your religious belief, like just try to pay some respect. They've been there for us before. So it's also like I'm quite surprised, like the people is really interested to doing this. Like they really engage. So then yeah, it's very interesting. They even do some prayings for this tomb, I mean, so it's become um very close to what they already did. It doesn't really like change how people's religious point of view, or like whether it's kind of like what is it called, blasphemy or some kind of that things. And yeah, I think we found out like when you actually can talk with them in and find out what is their necessity, it's really easy for this group of people to go around and join your projects. Yeah, there's also like many other places that kind of like related with doing this project, that related with ancient history, um, Muslim, Jawa kingdom, and so on and so forth. And then yeah, they're just quite happy to see that we can contribute something on that as aspect. What is this is too long. Anyway, yeah, this is some of the my friends that giving explanation. So they do like a tour to the ancient tomb, doing this kind of mural, street art, and most of it is not coming from us. It's coming from them. Like they said, like I saw this on Instagram or on Twitter. Can you do something like this? Like, okay, yeah, we can find you an artist that could help with that. So, um, yeah, there's a different um perspective on how we can do curations, and then um we found out like it's really a pity if we just let this experience go. So we kind of like um make a small report book, kind of, yeah, like a book where we kind of like putting all the experience. Some of them is putting like what kind of strategy that they do, how they approach the people, and then it's kind of like bringing us to this. I don't know. I don't want to call it formula, but this is some of the um to deconstruct the projects that we did with them. So this is just example, but there's three things that we think always necessary when we do like curation in a public space without institution. I think the first one is finding the necessity from the people. What do they need? What kind of issue needs to be addressed? Finding the use and common value. So yeah, kind of like work towards useful program for community, so on and so forth. And one important part is like to let them take action or work. And then networking is basically like, finding local people that could help you, talking, always talking. And then at the end, if it's possible, try to making connection with artists or collaborators. And then, it could end up with a project that actually coming from them.
Yeah.
So yeah, then that's my past. And then I have a very strange chapter in my life when at one day I was being contacted by these institutions and asking like, would you like to work as curators? Which for me, of course, money wise, of course, I would love to move and then get a little bit more, stable income. Well, of course, like I'm asking myself, like, what can I do? Like, I never been working in an institution before, and I don't know how whether things could work in my way, like the way I used to work before. And then, like Andrew said, like Japan is one of the densest art institution in the world, or at least in Asia. And it's not only about the buildings and the numbers, but also like bureaucracy, because then they have a very punctual way of what kind of projects that you can do. You can do this, you cannot do this, you can do this, you cannot do that, so on and so forth. But yeah, let me share a little bit about this institution. It's called like Yamaguchi Center for Arts and Media, or we call it YCAM. It's open in 2003, and it has a couple of functions, but basically, um, we don't have collections. So the way we work is always like we invite artists to come, and then we give them support, money, and also like human resource and equipment. Basically, the way the institution is being designed is like a theater space. So we don't have like white cubes, but we have all this, you know, structure of stage, which actually at some point it could allow us to try a very impossible installation that cannot be done in a white cube, like hanging very heavy things from top or like making a very strange installation. Uh, and beside of that, we also have like cinema, kind of like 100. They don't really understand what we do. Like, you're doing media arts, but then the people doesn't really engage with you, even though this is the only art institution that exists within the city, even the prefecture, that focusing themselves as media arts and technology. So, they try kind of like we try to set up a different ways of thinking. Instead of like being an art institution, we put ourselves as a laboratory. So how we can make a connection between education, art expression, and also a community. But then for me, at the time, I was thinking like, what can I do within these three things? So then I offer them, like, usually the way things work in this institution is like 1 year, one project, 1 year, one project. I said like I don't want to work with that, because it's really quick and then you don't really get something to learn. So then I proposed this 3 years program within this framework. So how these three elements that we already had, technology, media, arts, and society, and then how it could turns out into different platforms. So working with the public as collaborator, making YCAM as a hackable space for the public, and also like providing a lot of educational tools. And this is what I trying to convince them, like this is how I translate art production or art creation as like this institution wants me to be. Um, Not easy, but then I go through like some of other reference because I know like only explaining about Ruangrupa doesn't really help in this institutional practice. They need to look for some other like more established point of view. But then I found out this. I've been working with them before while in Ruangrupa, but I tried to bring this conversation again about arte util, which kind of like developed by Tania Bruguera, and then somehow it's being developed throughout some major museum in Europe. Yeah, trying to bring this idea to YCAM and kind of like trying to make a conversation about this, like how to build a constituent museum, how we can change our approach to the public, and how we can make ourselves open, um, kind of thing. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that I try to explain to the people that I'm been working in YCAM, but mostly it's about like how we change our approach. So then I did this project in 2000, which I start this project in 2021. This is a project with the Indonesian art collective called Seru, which basically trying to talking about how we can criticize education as not only like one way of learning, but it's we can learn from each other, and then how we can build the community based on that exchange of knowledge. We do some events inviting people to exchange, and beyond my expectation, this turns out like quite interesting for Japanese people to do that. I just give you a context. Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's this term in Japanese society that if like don't stick out than the others. So everyone will always like trying to repress themselves when. So you see like the strategy that I always use is kind of like giving people or offering them a platform and then let them like using it. It didn't works in Japan. If everyone would just like, yeah, go on. No, 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 no. It's not my turn. It's you. So yeah, I try to find a different ways how I can work within this idea. So then we kind of like inviting different group of people to kind of like exchange. And yeah, like I said, it turns out to be like a very good interaction between them. This one is project where I invite the local students to kind of like developing their ideal ways how they want the school to be. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting part, but yeah,
Can I
let's
just
go.
talk about the the knowledge market?
Yeah, go on.
Because I also participated in this event or this workshop. So if you go back to the man with the circle. Oh well, here's a yeah. So the previous image shows the people. Two people sit at a table and they take turns teaching the other person about something they know. So I taught my partner about translation because I've been doing a lot of translation work recently, and he happened to be a professor of aesthetics at a university, and he taught me about teaching, in fact. But so it's really interesting, and then we both take notes on these circular discs. But as you can see, people really got into it, and it was really amazing to see all the different forms of knowledge that were coming out in an organic way.
Yeah, yeah. So then this, yeah, again, like it's really beyond my expectation because I was quite doubting myself, like whether this kind of approach could work because this is completely a different culture, a different society, and I don't have any clue how things should work. But then again, yeah, I try to talk with some people, try to understand what they think about YCAM, the institution, and what kind of events that they want to have. And most of them is very basic. They want to have an open space for them to do their activity, and they want to talk. That's very interesting. Like, oh, you want to talk? Like, it's very easy thing to do, no? Like you just go and then. But then, yeah, then I realized that that's a common sense of like not to sticking out and then try to repress yourself. So the idea then is to giving them a kind of boundaries that kind of like could help them be someone else or like express themselves. So yeah, there's this book kind of like Zine where I asking them to fill out like some information, to try to facilitate people that who don't really like to talk to strangers, but they could still do some activities. And yeah, accompanying this project, I did some online talk session where I inviting different institution in Japan that also kind of like focusing in this alternative fields, like working with creative approach to help the community and kind of like basically it's for me to gain understanding how things works in Japan. And then we kind of like talking about different issue. I still cannot read whatever it's written there, but my colleagues is like kindly enough to translate everything to me. But then most of the time it's like it's like what kind of things that we can learn through art, what kind of value that we could contribute when we're doing like art project. So I continued this in 2020 last year, inviting some friends from UK, from Liverpool and Manchester at the time. We did a group discussion, mainly focusing about how we can change the institutional approach that we already take. And yeah, I'm also quite fortunate because Andrew could join with some of his students, and we kind of like exchanging conversation, which yeah, it's quite good for especially for our staff because usually they never had the chance to do this kind of conversation and kind of like expressing what they're thinking about the institution. And this is what I'm been doing this year. This is the last project for this 3 years program. Um, I came up with the idea from the experience for the 2 years. It's the project called Speculative Library. In Japan, it's called Asoberu Toshokan, or basically means like playable library, where I basically just built a dome, like a platform for people to come and use the space. And I'm providing them with some tools to kind of like exchanging information and also sharing their stories. And yeah, I don't know how things could work, but it will open in the end of October, and I would like to see how they will develop. There's some interesting program. Like I invite local artists, and I asked like, "What's your problem with YCAM?" And they said like, "Yeah, they never exhibiting our works because they're already focusing on media art." So we we make a program called Anywhere Art Appreciation, where basically we invite local artists, not media artists, painters, illustrators, sculptors, to kind of like exhibiting their works within this dome. So, it's become like they kind of like doing exhibition in YCAM. And these artworks then, because this is a library where the visitor could borrow them for like certain period of time, like 1 week or 2 weeks. And we ask them like to give their feedback to the artists, like how do they feel when they own the works in their home. So it's also like we're trying to make a connection between the community and the local artists that exist within Yamaguchi City. So yeah, hopefully it could be like another interesting project that I could do. But yeah, this is the things that I just realized, the constraints that I have been experiencing throughout the career. It's always structure, resource, and tension. This is always the three things that I experience. I think perhaps you can contribute more based on your experience, but I think this is always the case when we work as a curators. It's either we have the budget, but we don't have the time, or we have the space, but we don't have the budget, so on and so forth. And then when the exhibition happen, somehow you have problem with, like fundings, over budget, or like people will come protesting your exhibition because they have different ideology, and so on and so forth. And then, yeah, I think I just got quick. I think this is the first exhibition that I saw when I was in art school, and it's being canceled by a right-wing paramilitary Muslim group because it shows nude image. And the exhibition was one of the biggest biennale that happening in 2005. It's only open for 3 days, and after that, it's closed. Um, which kind of like show you a different tension on this. I don't know if you know about this, but this is a movie made by a Dutch filmmaker, which focusing on Indonesian dark history in 1965. You cannot show this film anywhere at all. So some of this, you remember, I explained about the cinema program where we do. We tried to do this, and couple of military guys came and then kind of like, why you doing this kind of thing, and interrogate you. And then yeah, I think this is also a very good example. The last documenta have a very big controversy when they show this work from Taring Padi. I believe this was taken just before or after the opening. But this artwork later is being covered with the black cloth and taken down due to the pressure from the public regarding anti-Semitism issue. So yeah, I think that's all. But um, yeah, I think there's the things that I could share with you tonight.
Thank you, Barto, for sharing, your experiences with us. And I think they again cover a lot of interesting different avenues. Just on the last point that you raised, even in Japan, we have issues of ideology and exhibitions getting shut down. In our case, over the memory of World War II and the memory of the Japanese Empire. So right-wing politicians try to suppress anything that could be construed as critical of the empire. So, for example, the comfort woman issue, the so-called comfort woman issue, is often suppressed. Also, people protesting about kind of forced labor of Koreans during the empire is another issue that gets suppressed. So, and we could even turn it on its head with the Taring Padi example as one thing. Also in the US, with heightened sensitivity towards race relations, that you know, it could be seen as a positive development, that people are kind of being circumspect about how they discuss other races, but it's also, you know, in a sense, it inscribes a limitation on what people can say or express as much as something that we consider to be coming from the right-wing side. So I don't know if everyone's okay to stay on a little extra. Maybe we could have questions for Barto. Ramisha?
The most exciting part of the whole conversation was starting off from a private place into a temporary solution, a temporary exhibition, engaging with public. When I did an exhibition at a shoe factory, they had 800 labor workers. So a sea of men who have
all men.
All men. Because again, we live in Pakistan, it's a patriarchal society. You wouldn't see women over here. And introducing female artists was again very political. A lot of the workers, there was this female artist, Rabia Nasi, she was working with the workers one-on-one to break that shyness of break that tension between men and women, and men would be like, we would like if you wore a scarf. That would make us more comfortable. So I feel like during public engagement and in Pakistan, an issue of gender, because this is a public society. If I out on the street, start working with public, I would cater and I would get more attention from men because they're on the streets. You would see more men working in workshops and factories. And to be bringing women in places like this is itself a political way, or maybe just a way to engage public, to make them feel easy towards women. But I want to ask, did you feel Indonesia, a Muslim place, again, Islam and having similar attributes, somewhat similar, I assume? Did you face these kind of issues with gender?
Yeah. I think so. But I think we've been like the relation between male and female. It's not so tense, like as you mentioned. But then for other, like, let's talk like LGBTQ. It's still difficult to. For example, you can do an exhibition showing some artworks that kind of portraying LGBT or queerness, but you cannot show that in the title of public. So you cannot make exhibition about queer in Indonesia as a title. It will straight away cut. And then I think in our case it's the society is a little bit much more open. Like they don't really care that much. But then if you touch subjects such as communism, that was like a big no. It's whatever. They wouldn't allow you to open it. But yeah, I think in terms of that, we kind of like share the same issue, especially in the last 20 years. I think there's a growing powers regarding the right-wing Muslim or Islamic group that kind of like trying to take over like the political ownership. But there is an interesting phenomena that happening maybe like 5 years or like 7 years ago. Whereas there is this friend called Hijra. I believe you understand it, Hijra. So it's kind of like migrating. So basically, it's kind of like you return back to to become like religious, right? And it's kind of like quite massive, and it's happening also within my generation. So some of my friends who then Hijra is like calling us and kind of like, do you still keep my paintings or my sculpture? And say, yeah, what's up? Can you give it back to me because I want to burn or destroy them? And they become like so you know very strict on like to do like Islamic rules or points. And there's a group of artists that trying to form a group like Islamic art, in a sense, like they don't paint like figurines and also like living things, so on. And yeah, that's still happening up until now. So yeah, again, that's always the case when you work, especially without institution backing you up. It's really tough, I should say, to because then again, I mean, I Andrew mentioning about the problem with one of the exhibition regarding comfort women in Japan. And of course, at the time, I was also feels like, oh, being a curator is really tough. Like you're not only getting pressure from public, but also from the artists. Because like when you think like, okay, let's close the exhibition, and then the artist will come to you and kind of like, you're censoring my works. And I was like, oh my God, what's what should we do? Like to whom we should put our foot or like our standpoint. So yeah, I agree with you. I think we share almost a similar
Also,
issue.
I feel like as a curator, I mean that female artist, she's much older than me. She wanted to work with these men one on one, and she was asking for their clothes. She was like, I need your clothes and I want to embroider on your clothes. And they were all in shock. They were like, a woman asking for our clothes. What does she want from us? And then she would come to my house and use my washing machine to wash those clothes and to embroider things on their clothes. Anyway, the only problem was, as a curator, she has a creative expression, but I feel the need to protect her from getting harassed or from getting to maintain a safe distance, maybe. Or should I just let her experience the community as it is?
Yeah, that's it. I had some experience working with foreign artists that kind of trying to against the norm. I mean, it's basically contemporary. So we do a public art project in a traditional market, and then his idea was like he wants to make a 2 tons talc sculpture, like talc stone, and put in the middle of the entrance. Where he said, of course, the concept is nice. Like he said, like this is ephemeral thing. Like every time people touch the talc, it will, wash away, and then by through time, like maybe 1 year or a couple of months, it will start to like shrink, and then but it's of course it's an obstacle for people to go in, no? After the opening, because we pay for the market, for the sellers, like some money to do this kind of project. But they wait until the opening, and then the next day it's gone. I was like, and yeah, I got a lot of he protests me, like he's angry with me a lot because he said like you should protect my work. But yeah, I said like, yeah, I know, but we cannot go against the community wish. And I tell them in advance, like, this is quite risky if you want to take it, like, so this kind of, negotiation is also like a skill that sometimes we need to have, because I think at some point we need to understand the artist's point of view, philosophically or aesthetically. Also, at the same time, I think we need to translate. So maybe like what Andrew has been doing, it's saying like we need to translate whatever those intention to be like a little bit more digestible idea for the public. Otherwise, they will never, they wouldn't understand what you're trying to do, as if it's become an obstacle for their life. So how was the projects that you do? Like, how was the end of it? Is it everything's going fine, or?
Yeah. So the management ordered the factory owner ordered that this girl is not to be disturbed, because, and then I worked my way through the top that there was a strict order that whatever she asks for, whatever, I mean, the men should not be disturbing her, as she is protected by the management.
Oh.
So she was able to do what she wanted. I'm quite happy about that, and the work came out quite interesting. She made embroideries on men's clothes and gave them back to them. So
Oh.
yeah, it was quite interesting. So I would, yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's always challenging working in public. But it's also challenging working in institution. So yeah, but I always feel like there might be a slightly different ways of curating compared to, like, the usual way of, or let's say like Western context, to what we are, how do you say, experiencing in Asia, culturally, religiously. So, which again, that's also like what I feel in Japan, and when we do the project in Europe, for example, people will straight came up to you and then kind of like expressing their opinion. But in here, it never happened. So you need to make some channels in order to allow them to express their thoughts or feelings, so you can understand how do they receive your project. Because yeah, it's really, really difficult to measure. And I'm also like have like lately quite interested in the way, like, how we could, you know valuing our projects, like our art projects, outside the point of view of artists. Because like usually in public institutions, numbers is become very important, like how many visitors come to your exhibition. And I believe so with alternative space, perhaps Fasal also experiencing this, like how we got grants, we got funds from outside, and then they will ask like how many numbers of people that come. So I was thinking like whether there's a different way of evaluating our project, because like there's a lot of things that missing when we only focusing on numbers. There's experience, there's process, there's this kind of intensity, and also like learning process that happening throughout the whole projects that never counted for as like to show. Because like sometimes the projects could only works with like 10 or 15 audience, or like 100 audience, but then you realize like this audience have more engagement, like they really pay attention to what we deliver, what we presented, and then we kind of like have a very good um, communication with them in order to explain. So yeah, but I don't think I still needs time to convince my institution like there's a different way to measuring our programs. But yeah, perhaps they also like could be one of the concern. I don't know, like with others, but yeah, I'm quite interested with that.
Yeah, I think the promise of art is that it doesn't have to be evaluated the way that we do television or Hollywood movies, which is totally by the numbers. I think the promises of art is that if it reaches one person, then it's kind of justified itself. So I think now that we've entered this era of quantification, it is really difficult. You have to, as you said, Barto, find a way to translate.
Yeah.
If there's one number that people are looking at, you have to come up with a different number somehow. So yeah. Does anyone have another question for Barto?
Yes, hi.
Hey.
Firstly, I would like to say that I was fortunate enough to visit Documenta last year.
Oh,
Yes,
good.
when I was doing my course in Venice, we visited Castle. That was part of the program. And today, listening to your presentation, looking at all the projects that Ruangrupa has done, it really put into perspective what Documenta was trying to do, and the kind of exhibits that they had. Because I remember at the same time, Berlin Biennale was happening and Venice Biennale was happening, and we visited all three. It was such a stark difference between what Venice was doing, what Berlin was doing, and what Documenta was doing. And the whole alternate space philosophy that Ruangrupa has, I think, was very visible in Documenta, and we could really see it very critically was happening in a very institutional Venice Biennale setting and then in Documenta. So thank you for that. And
yeah, thank you to my friend.
and while we're talking about evaluating, I wanted to ask you whether when you were working with the alternative space, or even now when you're working at the institution, if there has been criticism on how you're approaching art practice and art curation, because I feel like in your practice, the projects that you've shared, it's curation, but there's also like activism and civic engagement and resistance involved in it. And even if we say that we should invent new evaluating measures on how we judge our projects, there are still certain standards in the art world that people see these projects through, at this moment at least. So has there been any case of real criticism, and how have you dealt with it?
Yeah, I think that was my first attempt in the institution when I do this exhibition. When Andrew is come, it's they complain because like the numbers is not match the, because usually like especially for this institution, I when I do a project, I need to put like how many people that you think will come, like, or how much people you can reach within. So we, as a curator, we need to put up with some kind of numbers, because usually the city will counting it as a cost performance. Like, okay, this project 10 million yen, how many people you can get, and then they kind of like calculating it. So I'm just randomly like, yeah, I think I could bring like 10,000 people. And then it found out it's just like I think it's around 3,000 or 4,000. So they kind of like criticizing me, like how this project is not really successful in a way. But then interestingly, so we had this group of gallery not really gallery sitter, but we call them like support staff. So we pay them hourly, and then they kind of like helping us to guide the exhibition. So what we asking the support staff is like we asking them to make a note like for when they finish their job, we ask them to make a note, like what happened on that day. Do you have some problem? What kind of conversation that you had with the visitors? And then I found out like there's a lot of very interesting story in the notes. Like, oh yeah, there's this Oji-chan, which means like a grandfather who came with their two children's and then kind of like playing around. And then it turns out he used to be a headmaster of a high school, and then he kind of like, yeah, the story like, oh yeah, I agree with this criticism about educations, and then how, we should move towards like only point-based evaluation to something like a little bit more humanistic approach, like, exchange conversation. So I came up with the idea, like, what if I show, like, without showing the name of the support staff, like, what if I borrow their comments and their notes, and I putting it as part of the report, like project report. So I try to do that. They usually like they doing it in for other exhibition as well, but the curators before, they never using it as a report. So I said like, can I using it as for a report? And then I submitted, and then yeah, the criticism is gone because they feel like, oh yeah, it's really touching stories, and I found out like, okay, I could move away with this. Like I could try to find a different ways. But when I do the project in the poor neighborhood, actually I got one critics from the locals. They said like, when you do a project, like how you defining the time, because at the time we really engage into it. And then I told you before that we almost do meetings almost every night, kind of like doing this and that. And then he told me like, yeah, you should consider like the excitement that you build with people, because like when you're working in art scene, like everyone knows what an exhibition will be, and then they will come to looking at it. But when you're working in public space or with community, they don't really understand what happened. They just engage with it, and then it consumes our energy and our time. So they said like, you should think more carefully about this, like when you're doing it, because it's really exhausting to keep like engaging. It's interesting, but it's also exhausting. And then they said like, because I think at the time I came up with the idea like, okay, let's do a little bit longer project, like 1 year. And then, but they said like, no, 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 no. You should keep it as like a big momentum for them to celebrate. So that's why it's always taking form as a festival, because they need to kind of channeling their energy at some point. But yeah, I learned from that projects that, when working with public, it's really difficult to follow like your timeline. So yeah, after that, I try to be a little bit more careful, not to implying my own timeline for the production, but instead kind of like, try to following their needs. But yeah, sometimes it's also difficult to negotiate, especially where if you got funding, and then you need to exactly put like how long you will work for this project, and you need to negotiate with them. If the project is extended or the project is not really working in that direction that you want. But yeah, that was one of the interesting experience for me to learn how public perceive this kind of art projects.
Have you ever also faced any concern when going out into the public in terms of, if they ever reacted in a way that saying that, why are you coming to this space, or who are you to kind of talk about our cause? Because that when we go into the public, especially in different marginalized communities, there's always this outsiders perspective. Why are you coming to us? So have you ever dealt with that?
Yeah. I never experienced that, thankfully, because like I said, I always start the approach with, friendship, or like at least I need to know them first. And then most of the curators that I invite for that project, like the slum area project, they also have been working with the neighborhood in their own cities. So they know how to behave. They know how to approach people. They know. So that's why it takes like maybe about 1 month just to go there and then kind of like talking with them and then so on. And then I think the best thing that we learned was like, don't came up with any idea is actually one of the best idea that we could have. So, because like I said, it's really difficult if the problem is like when you bring your own idea and then at some point like it doesn't really match with their intention. It's either end up with like we forcing our idea to them, or like they kind of like rejecting our idea. So I haven't, but like I said, one of the projects that we did in Ruangrupa, it's like stopped because then some of the people in the neighborhood, it started to like, asking us to pay some money in order to do the screening. And then we felt at the time like, yeah, maybe this is no longer their needs. I think it's somewhere around 2012. So I believe that smartphone is already strong enough, the influence, and then Netflix and some streaming. So then, they don't really need it. So then it's easy also for us because we know like this is not happening. So we need to cut it instead of like pushing it through. Yeah, so far I have never experienced that, but then yeah, I experienced a lot of like interesting questions. Like when I do the project in the slum area, like one of the fishermen, they came up to me and then bringing like this kind of like big miniature of ship, and then he said like, how much do you think I can sell this to an art gallery? I was like, I actually never been sell any artwork in my life. I was like, I thought you always like buy, like, oh no, it's collector, like it's not curator. I was like, oh yeah, I see. But yeah, so far that's the only interesting conversation that I encountered. But yeah, thankfully so far I haven't received any a problem with the community that I've been working with.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
I think, it's important to remember exactly what you brought up, Barto, that needs change, and that when you're working with community, you have to be responsive to the needs of the community. And as came up in the other question, you also have to negotiate with the community. I would say it's also, as a curator, part of the negotiation is also knowing when to push. So you can push buttons, but you have to do it intentionally. You don't want to push a button because you didn't know what you're doing. That's when it can really, and maybe Documenta is the good example of that, in fact. So I think you want to be as intentional as possible. But anyways, I think we're out of time now. So Barto, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Thank you everyone for listening and for also sharing your great questions. Is really a great exchange, I think, for me and for you too, probably, Barto.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.